Hey everyone, welcome back to another Kitecast episode. I'm your host for today's show, Patrick Spencer. For today's podcast, it's going to be a real treat. I'm speaking with Chris Pogue, a cybersecurity luminary with a 25-year journey that spans everything from hands-on penetration testing to executive leadership, public as well as private sector roles. Through Chris's experience as a global head of operations, the chief information security officer, military instructor, university professor, among other things, he's developed a rare combination of technical expertise, business acumen that allows him to decode complex security challenges through a strategic lens. Currently, Chris serves as the director of digital forensics over at CyberCX. We're going to have an interesting conversation about that organization. They're doing some really cool things, as well as an adjunct professor over at Oklahoma State University. Chris, thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Patrick. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Well, some in our audience may not be familiar with CyberCX. Let's start by talking a bit about the organization, what you guys do, how long you've been around, who are your clients, and so forth.
Yeah, it's I tell you, it's a great organization. It's the biggest cybersecurity company you've never heard of, and predominantly because it is a Southern Hemisphere company. So born and raised in the Australian government. The co-founders, one of them, Alistair McGibbon, the other one, John Peteridis, one came out of government, one came out of telco. And they said, look, everyone is sort of nibbling around the edges. We want to do, a very strong, very deep, pure play cybersecurity company. And so they gobbled up 24 different boutique organizations, put them under one banner, which is the CyberCX banner. So while as an organization, we've only been, officially around for 5 years, the companies that CyberCX purchased during that acquisition phase have been around for as much as 20 years. And so we have a very deep and long pedigree in the Australian, New Zealand market. Well, then, through a combination of, organic, inorganic growth, today we sit at about 1,500 cybersecurity professionals, and we are pure play cyber. Like, we don't do anything else. We don't sell hardware. We don't sell software. We don't schlep cloud storage. Like, we are pure play cybersecurity experts, which makes us one of the largest teams on the planet. And then just because of, market dynamics and size, the next logical movements for the company was the US and the UK. And so we have a presence of about 25 people here in the United States, but our capabilities are the global team. Right. We have 200 penetration testers. We have, 40 incident responders. We've got about 250 people in our strategy and risk team. So very wide, very deep capabilities. And like I said, a very wide swath of different unique pillars within the organization.
Interesting. So you have an advantage in that you're not distracted by all the other things that you could be involved with from a professional services standpoint. You guys are focused only on cybersecurity, whereas the big five, they're doing that, and they're doing, supply chain methodology. They're doing business reengineering, and among many other things. You guys are solely focused. So when someone engages you, they're getting your full organization and the scope of your expertise in cybersecurity only.
Correct. And, if we've been in cybersecurity long enough to know that no investigation, no pen test, no, strategic uplift is ever singularly focused, right? There's always we need some help with cloud, and we need some help with networking, and we really want to do a threat hunt, and we have to do pen test. And so it's very easy to have a conversation about one of our service offerings, and then it becomes 5 conversations, right? Mm-hmm. About, how do we build this and wrap this and make it like a whole, the part of this complete breakfast, right? Remember those commercials when we were kids? And so that is our strength, right? And as you pointed out, we're not distracted. We don't have things that are me toos. We just do this, and that's all we do, which is very powerful. And we focus on tradecraft. Like, yes, we want to make money, and yes, we want to compete and go to market and all the things a business should do. But one of the things that makes CyberCX so fulfilling to work at is we genuinely focus on tradecraft. We want subject matter expertise to be as deep as possible, and so we encourage training and education and cross training and cross function and So when you get someone on the team, you know that they're going to be deep in what you're asking them to do, but they may have expertise in other areas, or they'll know enough to go, look, I can have about a 5-minute conversation about this, but I tell you what, let me get one of the foremost experts, in the Southern Hemisphere on this very topic, and we'll get them on the phone, and then we can create really robust solutions very quickly.
Interesting. Well, before we jump into some other details around your thoughts, for example, around where digital forensics and investigations going, some of the reports you guys publish, the Verizon data breach investigations report just came out. It's probably worth a brief touch on it as well. But before we do so, let's talk a bit about your background. You've been over at the CyberCX, I think, for about 3-4 years now, if I remember correctly.
I just passed 2, so I'm at 2 years, 2 months now.
Yeah, great. And then you teach part-time over at Oklahoma State University, but that's what you've been doing recently. Talk about your career. I mean, you have an expansive career in both public and private sector, military experience, a lot of cool things that you've done.
Yeah. So been at CyberCX 2 years, little over 2 years with in the forensics role. But as you said, I'm an adjunct professor at Oklahoma State University at the Spears School of Business. So I teach international business and digital forensics, and so I get to write the courses, which was fantastic. So I get to mash my students together. So when we run tabletop exercises, I bring in my business students and give them a lens of what this looks like if they were going to be part of a data breach scenario in their jobs in the future. It also teaches my MSIS students that one of the most important lessons I think that anyone entering this industry can learn is how to communicate. Like, it's easy to communicate with other technical people, right? We all sort of speak the same language and we have our own jargon and acronyms, but it's really difficult to get non-technical people to understand what we're talking about sometimes. It's a different language. And so teaching them early on how to translate what it is that you're trying to say into the language of your target audience. Because I can tell you, as a former CISO, going into a board meeting or an executive meeting speaking tech does not get you far, right? Everyone starts wondering what's for lunch, as opposed to listening to you talk about speeds and feeds and ones and zeros and firewalls and all the stuff that we like talking about. But if you can make that transition and think, well, what is the chairman of the board really interested in? And what is the CEO really interested in? And what is the CFO really interested in? And how do I nuance my language so that it resonates with them? Well, then I can communicate what I want. I just do it in a different way. And then they go, oh, okay, well, I want those things. So therefore you can go do your things, Chris. So really important piece that I've learned over the years, both consulting and being a CISO, is that language is just so important. And if you don't get that right, you're just going to struggle. And so I get the opportunity to teach that, to my students. So now coming out of university, right, they're ready to hit the ground running and have a little bit of an advantage over, some of their other, their competitors in that landscape.
That's great. A lot of your students aren't necessarily cybersecurity professionals. It sounds like they're business majors, they're finance majors, marketing majors, maybe even, who knows?
Yeah, it's all across the spectrum. And so even though my tech students are typically, they want to go into cybersecurity, right? They're getting a master's degree in data science or data analytics or management information systems. Like, they're true technicians. But as you said, my business students could be everything from finance majors to econ majors to, marketing, entrepreneurship, right? They're business people. And then how do we mash them together, right? And how do we get them speaking the same language? So it really is a microcosm of the much larger industry, but so important for them to learn it at those early stages. And I was just on a panel in India last week where we talked about this exact thing with a number of universities across India, having to deal with students are very smart and they're very technical, but now you're in the global, job market. And how do you take that technical knowledge that you have and not let it pigeonhole you into, oh, you're just a technician, all you're going to understand is technical stuff, but you understand the business of that technical stuff and how it interacts with, all of the different aspects of the business and what you're trying to accomplish and things like that. So really different perspective, but I think it's one that's gaining notoriety and traction.
You guys are engaged, for organizations that are trying to be proactive and strategic in addressing, potential gaps in their cybersecurity methodology or their infrastructure, if you may, or their processes. But you also are brought in after the fact as well to deal with, we had a data breach. We need to do forensics analysis to help us figure out, where it happened, what data was exposed, what type of data was exposed, where it went, and so forth. From a forensics analysis standpoint, are you seeing, trends in the marketplace in terms of changes in terms of the types of attacks? Are they getting more sophisticated? Are they using the same old tools because they're still effective in terms of getting into, past the network perimeter and getting into valuable data repositories? Or are you seeing more AI being used in more sophisticated attacks?
Yes. and I'll explain.
I figured that was the answer.
And I'll explain what all those mean, right? So I actually just finished a blog post, and it's being edited by our marketing team now, called "The More Things Stay the Same." And we talk about the resurgence of attacks, like SQL injection is making a comeback. And so when we really dig into why some of these older attacks are starting to resurface, right? We're seeing some, I don't want to call them alarming just yet, but some interesting characteristics, right? We see unpatched systems that have been forgotten about in large infrastructures, or the thoughts that, well, this is an older vulnerability, right? No one's attacking this anymore. So almost a laissez-faire approach to older patches and older operating systems, which is not the case. Like they're still there, they're still present. In fact, I did some research recently that showed once a exploit is announced, it's typically 24 to 48 hours before threat actors will start pouncing on it, and averages to patch is between 60 and 90 days. But then you move into unpatched systems that are older that maybe people didn't know about, or was a reserve system that was an older laptop that was given out to someone on a temporary basis as a loaner or something like that. So we still see these older things popping up. So don't think just because SQL injection is 35 years old now that it's gone. It is absolutely not gone. And then the other part, the second part to that question is what are the trends? I think globally, right, BECs and ransomware and phishing are still king, right? It's every organization everywhere in the world, whether we're talking to victims, whether, I'm an InfraGard member in the New York City chapter. I work with the Secret Service Cyber Fraud Task Force in a number of cities. In Australia, we're members with the Australian Federal Police, AFP, NCA in the United Kingdom. Everyone sees the same stuff. And I think the concepts work. And so why stop using them, right? We're hacking the human. We're getting people to click on things. So the technicians are spending lots of money trying to figure out, well, how do I protect you from yourselves? But we still have cases where CEOs clicking on well-crafted phishing emails, pop-ups. Oh, I don't want a virus. I want to scan for a virus. I'm going to click on that, not knowing you don't have that, virus protection program. You have another one. And so we see a lot more of those, right? Vishing or voice phishing is becoming, more prevalent. Yeah. So we're concerned about deep fakes, not video. Video is really, really hard to do from an AI perspective because you got to match facial expressions, hand movements, intonation, voice pitch. And one of the things I teach my students is only 7% of communication is the words we use, right? 93% is everything else.
Everything else, yeah.
And AI is not good at that other 93%. But if there's no visual component, right, they're a little better at it. So that's a bit of a concern. And so that's where we start to see the maturation of attacks and the integration of AI, and sort of looking down the future, how quantum's going to be used. We'll see more polished attacks. Like it used to be, I am Nigerian prince, I have money to share. Yeah. Like those are long, long gone. Like
sounds
the
real
phishing emails we get are super clean. They look good. They're timely. They hit on holidays. They hit on tax season, right? The NFL draft is coming up, so there's going to be lots of NFL draft ones. Like there's a whole surgence. And then once they get access, right, then they take you to a mirror sites. So we're seeing legitimate sites get poisoned and become mirror sites. And so they become data harvesters. You log in, MFA, session hijacking is not a super difficult attack. So even if you have MFA, don't think that's the silver bullet. And so we see that sort of stuff really prevalent all over the world. And as technicians, we think, well, these are pretty easy to spot. But remember, the overwhelming majority of technical users are users, right? They're not IT security professionals. So, I think we'll continue to see that. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think we will see the evolution of AI generated attacks, AI generated botnets, quantum, leveraging quantum computing for, decryption and things like that. I think that's all on the horizon.
Yeah. What, staying on the topic of attacks, with the new Verizon report that just came out, there was a section on ransomware. It's up. And I remember a conversation I had on a webinar or podcast with Charles Carmichael over at Mandiant a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago or so, where we were seeing, like with the Move It attack, more organizations were refusing to pay ransom because the data is out there. It's already been exposed by, due to regulations, they need to announce that it was hacked anyway, and they were simply opting out of paying ransom. The report from Verizon this year seemed to indicate that trend is continuing. Is that something that you're seeing when you're doing forensics analysis post cleanup when a data breach has happened?
Yeah, I think it's both, right? Because you'll see, and exactly like the report says, and exactly like the folks you spoke to at Mandiant had said, organizations are getting better at doing backups, right? I mean, that's kind of the magic bullet for ransomware. Can you restore from backup, right? And then you're okay. Then you only lose from the time of the attack to the backup. But that's we got to remember what's being reported is only what's being reported. Like we don't see what's not being reported, underreported, or misreported, right? So you have to kind of take those statistics with kind of a little bit of skepticism because we're not getting the whole picture. Because I guarantee we have worked with clients that have paid, and they're like, look, we don't have another option. The first thing they're going to do when they get in is they're going to go find those backup servers, right? And they're going to try to take them offline, encrypt them, or delete them.
Yeah.
So if you remove backups, then you better hope you have tape backups or some sort of backups offline. So that's the advice that we give organizations is if you have backups, test them. Don't think just because someone said we have immutable backups that you really do. Go out there and make sure. And then if you have tape backups, make sure you can restore from tape. It works, right? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other part, we see double dipping a lot. So organizations will get extorted and then ransomed. So they say, hey, we got your highly regulated data. We're going to release it on GitHub or some sort of dump site. And if you don't pay us our 2 bits, right, all of your data is going to be out in the ethers. And that's where, okay, we've already reported it. The data's already gone. Like you don't have to whack us in the head with that. But then they go, okay, and you're encrypted. And so which means you can't do anything like these whole operations.
Yeah.
And we have to look to now we've got other types of OT systems that, it's not necessarily getting the data back, but it's your inability to do your jobs, right? So think of a port, all the ships coming in and out, where they go and what's on those ships and manifests, like that's all computer driven. You lock that up, you lock the port up. You lock the port up, there's no imports. There's no imports, right? You've got all these other problems. Same thing with emergency management systems, building management systems. All this OT, which we say is typically air gapped from IT networks. That's not always the case. Yeah. So I think that is going to be a trend that we see. Like not as much, haha, we have your data. Give us money or we're gonna release it. It is, haha, we have locked up your building, and no one can get in. No one's using the elevators. No one's using the escalators. Or we've locked up your payment processor. Haha, you're done. You're not processing payments until you do this. So I think less data brokerage and more arresting, functionality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. the report also talked a bit about third party risk and then the human element. Let's talk about third party. When you have organizations, we do an annual study like you guys, and we find that 2/3 of organizations have over 2,500 third parties that they exchange data with, right? In various ways, email, file sharing, file transfer, web forms, and so forth. That's a huge exposure risk because you don't always know what kind of security controls those organizations have in place. So, one, how do you vet vendors when you're consulting with a client? What recommendations do you have for them? And then, there's some governance controls, or we argue that's the case based on our business, that you need to have in place to ensure that the data that you have is only seen by those who need to see it, who need to edit it. There's controls in place to restrict who they can send it to. And then we have this possessionless editing capability where the data never leaves your environment. Someone can edit it, but it stays in your environment and they can't pass it around and it can't be breached outside of your environment. So what are you seeing on those two fronts?
Yeah, so the third party risk, that's such a huge challenge because, I mean, like you said, you don't know what everyone's security posture is. And everyone, we have these sheets you have to fill out, and organizations are doing their due diligence, saying, well, you have to show your compliance, you got to show your SOC 2 type 2, or whatever regime you're beholden to. Like, you got to show us all that stuff, and that, I think that gives you a measure of confidence. But nothing's unhackable, and no one's bulletproof. So just knowing that if you have a supply chain, whoever the pieces in the supply chain are, depending on your reliance on them to execute your business model, it's a risk, right? It's let's say you're a book publisher, right? You don't make paper. The company that makes the paper and cuts it into the little things that you then bind into a book. What if your paper distributor gets compromised, right? And they get arrested and they can't provide paper, and now you can't make books, and so your core competency is damaged. There's hundreds of those across a business. And so I think there's, sort of best case scenario. There's, are you, doing your due diligence with these companies? You're doing business with reputable companies. Are you, asking them to make sure they're giving you timely data? Like your SOC 2 type 2 compliance attestation can't be 3 years old, right? You gotta show that you're on top of this stuff. And then just knowing it's a risk and walking through, well, what do you do if you have this? And tabletopping, like when we run tabletop exercises, we will include third parties because it might not be you. Your stuff might be completely fine and it's someone else's, and it brings you to your knees, right? So how do you tell your customers, the board, your executive team, is we have ground to a halt by something that's not our fault at all. And then there's another piece of it that's really interesting when we see BECs and how organizations move across, and spread their wings, so to speak, is, business email compromise happens. They assume my identity. They are sending and receiving emails as if they were me. So it's very easy to send an email to a trusted client or to a trusted partner with an attachment or an update. Hey, I've just changed our payment terms. You're used to talking to the controller. And so for them to say they've got a new bank account doesn't seem very strange.
Actually correct. Yeah.
And so we see a lot of that where we see invoice fraud, and then we'll see expense fraud, right? We'll see, I went to this. I'm going to, use AI, generate a receipt, submit that as an expense. And so that lateral movement across the supply chain, like we've worked a number of BECs within the last year that was downstream because of supply chain. And so, it's complex. And so as business leaders, right, I encourage all of my customers and those that I speak with in the community, like your security used to be really easy. It was like this castle moat, analogy that we would use. And it's just like, I got to protect my thing. That ship has sailed, my friend. Now it's, I got to worry about my thing and I got to worry about everybody else's thing and how it interacts with my thing. And we haven't even started talking about APIs yet, because that represents a whole other challenge. Is, well, what if my thing is plugged into your thing? Can I trust that while your UI might be secure, you may not have those same controls within your APIs? And so that represents, so it's this really complex web that if you're not living it and breathing it every day, like you're really going to struggle to keep up. Like And I know it's kind of self-serving, right? We're a cybersecurity company, so it's going to sound like that. But man, if I promise you, if you're not living and breathing this on a daily basis and you're dealing with the PRC, the PLA, the DPRK, Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, right? Ransom Hub, right? All of these threat actor groups who are 20 times bigger than any resources we can throw at the problem. Like you're just, it's what's it called? Ballistic podiatry, right? You're just shooting yourself in the foot unnecessarily.
There's an analogy a military guy would only know, I think. There's a lot of third-party applications that organizations use for exchanging information with third parties, as you well know. So a lot of those are legacy technologies that may not have the latest security capabilities built into them, double encryption, 256 encryption at least, right? DLP, SIM, AI capabilities around anomaly detection and so forth. Is that a real concern when you're consulting with organizations? Is that a point you touch on with them? The unfortunate aspect is a lot of those are a bit difficult to rip and replace, right? To get rid of something requires a new acquisition and a whole vetting process, and then you need to get everyone trained and up to speed on that new technology. How do you deal with that as an organization? Change is not always easy, but sometimes necessary.
No, and your point about rip and replace, right? I remember working with a client once that said, look, we want to move from technology A to technology B. Technology B is superior. We want it. It will cost us $1 million just to get rid of technology A, right? And that doesn't count things like lost opportunity costs, like you mentioned. What if I miss something? I got to fine tune it, and then I have to have a period where I'm, making sure that my changes and my fine tuning, right, is instrumented properly to get the results that I want. That I got to train and educate. Like that is a bumpy road, and some people are like, yes, this isn't the best tool. Yes, it has, some challenges, but right, there's alligators closer to the boat. Like let's deal with those and worry about this, this transformation or digital transformation or uplift later. And so with, businesses that we consult with, all of them have similar like there is not any organization in the Fortune 500 or the Fortune 1000 or the 33 million SMBs in the US, right, give or take, that are coming in pristine, right? Yeah. There is always a mountain of data or legacy systems or new CISOs that inherited this or, outgoing CISOs that didn't pay attention to that because they were, looking towards retirement. Like there's a litany of reasons. And all of them are, they're good, right? Businesses, their primary focus is to make money, and you want to do that in a secure way. And you want security to be seen as an enabler versus a detractor from the business, which isn't always the case. So really understanding, I think this is now becoming more, prevalent with consultants as opposed to just leaning on CISOs, having a really wide aperture of not just cybersecurity, but of business, of what is your core competency? How do you make money? What is your infrastructure challenges? What are your supply chain challenges? Like it's this really big thing that isn't one thing anymore. Like it's an amalgamation of a lot of things, which is it's becoming increasingly complex. Yeah. And so any organization, we would say, look, don't feel bad. Like everybody has this, but you can't go it alone. Like hire CyberCX or hire another firm. I'd prefer us, but like don't go it alone. Like get someone that does this on the regular to help lead you and guide you and help security be an enabler to the business, because you can do it. You just have to understand the nuances of the business, how it makes money, how it goes to market, how you work with your customers, and make that parts of that security planning as opposed to like a bolt-on. Like bolt-on security has never worked. It never will. It's always going to be, well, I spent money on this. I didn't get the outcomes I want, because you approached it completely wrong.
You make a good point. We published a report on the preparedness level of the DIB in regards to CMMC 2.0, which we can talk a bit about because you have some experience in that area. And we found, and we published it jointly with Coalfire, that organizations that have engaged experienced third parties like yourselves were much more likely to have their encryption house in order,
Mhm.
to have advanced technologies in place, to have all of their security policies and practices
Mhm.
fully documented and so forth. I assume that's what you find as well, that organizations that are relatively immature are doing most things in-house, and there's
Mhm.
certainly exceptions. There always are exceptions, but many of them are coming to you and things are in a bit of disarray because they just haven't had that. And sometimes it's good to have an external party come in who's not, has the blinders on. They're within the organization. They're going to have certain biases and they're just going to be blind to certain things that are going on in the organization that, they have a lot of work to do, and you
Mhm.
help walk them through that process.
Yeah.
And are you seeing that in the DIB, particularly when we talk about CMMC 2.0, which
Yeah.
is here? Organizations need to get prepared for it. Katie Arrington is a big fan of it, always has been,
Mhm.
and it's going to have teeth very, very soon.
Yeah, and it's already
It
dropped.
does.
Right? And so it's, if you want to do business with the federal government, that's it. Thou shalt be CMMC compliant. Doesn't matter if you make battleships or you are filling vending machines, right? Thou shalt be compliant.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think the challenge there is a business lesson. It has nothing to do with cybersecurity. It has everything to do with core competency. Like and this is a good to great, right? Core competency, hedgehog principle, right? Whatever language you want to use, that Jim Collins book. But organizations have something they're focused on. It's what they do best. It's how they make money. It's whether they're making candy or they're amusement park or whatever. They have a thing that they're doing. Now you throw cybersecurity on top of that, or really anything, right? You throw that on top of that. If that is not your core competency, then you do that internally, you are relegating it to non-experts because your organization is focused and pointed in one direction to be an expert in one thing. It's the same concept. Why, an amusement park, why don't you make your own, why don't you bake your own bread? Why don't you manufacture your own trash cans? Why don't you, manufacture the steel for the rides? It's not what you do. And cybersecurity is no different. I think it's finally caught up to that, that position that all these other aspects of the business are in. But organizations increasingly are looking at this going, look, we have a few people that know about this and they might be very good, but we just have a few people that know about this that are very good. We need 1,000 people and their brains helping us on this because of the increased complexity. So it's not like you can't have the internal function, but I would limit internal function for that exact reason. They probably have a dozen other things that they're doing at the same time. But by relinquishing that to an expert, I have nothing else. I don't think about anything else. I don't do anything else. All of the experts within CyberCX are singularly focused on cybersecurity and our clients' well-being. That's it. That is our core competency, right? And so, I would say, and it's infinitely less expensive to pay my bill than it is to pay for a breach.
Yeah,
right? The IBM Ponymon report says globally it's about 4.5 million. United States about 9 million. 9 and change. My bill is not $4.5 million. I wish it was.
I'll bet you it's over 10 million.
It wouldn't shock me.
It comes out in July.
Yeah. So, and I will tell your listeners after doing this for 30 years, and if anyone has a contradictory example, I would love to hear it. But in my career and in my experience, I have yet to find an organization who underinvested in cybersecurity and was thankful that they did later.
Yep.
I've not run across it ever. It's always you brief the board, and especially after an incident, which is where I spend most of my time. They constantly look backwards and go, "How did we get here?" And then the next question is, "How do we make sure we're never here again?"
Yeah.
And so those two things are like, I don't want to dime anybody out, but I want to say, look, we could have answered that stuff 6 months ago for you. We can run a pen test. We can run compromise assessments. We can do business impact analyses to go, look, if this were to happen tomorrow, this is what it would look like.
Yeah.
We war gamed this in the military, for hundreds of years, going through, combat scenarios and threat simulations and stuff like that. That goes back to the Romans. So actually, it goes back before that. It goes back to the Greeks.
The Greeks.
Right?
I was about to say.
Yeah, there was a hoplite general named Archelaus, if I'm saying it right. But he basically said, you don't rise to the level of your training, or no, you don't rise to the level of the occasion. You fall to the level of your training.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't go through these processes, find yourself in a position where you're not prepared mentally, you're not prepared emotionally, you're not prepared technically to deal with it. And then that's why the bill becomes $4.5 million or $9 million versus if you look at it proactively, you're like, yeah, I got to make an investment of, $500,000 up front, but I will never pay that $4.5 million. Right. So again, I'm getting the better end of the deal there.
Do you, speaking of regulations, we talked about CMMC, in Australia where your parent company, where your company's based, they have IRAP, which we did IRAP certification 3 or 4 years ago. It's one of the first things I did when I worked on press release and some other things when I first joined Kiteworks. Are you, from your vantage point, are these regulations like these FedRAMP? We're FedRAMP high ready now. We're FedRAMP moderate since 2017, I think it is. Are these helping to drive, lower risk within, are they lowering risk within organizations? Are they driving better security standards or organizations better because of these? What's your perception?
Yeah, I think to an extent, right? And the comparison that I frequently use is the airline industry versus the medical industry, right? So before you get on any flights, right, commercial or private, pilots got a checklist, and the pilot's going through that check. Now that doesn't mean
everything checks off. Yeah,
that doesn't mean planes don't go down, and it doesn't mean there's not pilot error or mechanical errors or things like that. But you are minimizing the amount of risk based on prior knowledge, right? So that's why we have the NTSB, right? A plane goes down, they descend, they figured out what happens, they extract those lessons learned, they apply it to the airline industry gets smarter and better, right? So even though we see planes that have challenges from time to time, it is orders of magnitude more safe to fly than it's ever been, right? It's something like a 0.05%, rate of failure, which is, it's like one flight for every 10 million or something. Like it's super, super safe because we've learned things. So if we take that mindset and we say, look, we've seen stuff go wrong for 30 years. So if we find all of those things and we build a checklist just like pilots do, and we tick all those boxes, we're reducing, the likelihood of something that we know could likely happen from happening. It doesn't mean, nothing's bad is ever going to happen, but it means we're in a better place. And why I bring in the healthcare industry is that's a great example of it not doing that. Like, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but there's a lot of people that go into hospitals that either don't come out or come out in worse shape than they went in. And then, hospitals have lawyers and they don't want investigations. And so they sort of, they use this, well, it was a mystery of medical science, or medicine is complex, or people respond to, like, there's always some reason. And I have friends that are doctors, right? So I think they're all brilliant people, but I think the culture is one that's that's less like the NTSB and more litigious, right? So we don't have the level of safety. It's it's safer than it's been, but it hasn't kept pace with the airline industry. And I think that's why. I think it's the exposure to what did we do wrong? What happened? What lessons can we learn from this? What do we need to change? How do we implement that? Yeah. And that's what these regimes are meant to do, whether it's CMMC or IRAP or the Essential 8 in Australia or, CPA or GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, Gramm-Leach-Blackley, like PCI, whatever. They're just tick boxes to make sure you're not making the mistakes of the past. Yeah. Now, there's new mistakes, and hopefully we evolve and get better over time. But the caution that we always give our clients, and whenever I speak at conferences, things like that, and this has been for years. This isn't me. This is security professionals in general. Don't mistake compliance with security. They are not the same thing. They will never be the same thing. Your compliance with a list, just like a checklist, right? On an airliner. It doesn't mean you are 100% safe. It just means you're less likely that something's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Go right ahead.
Every podcast in cybersecurity would be remiss if you didn't touch on Gen AI, NAI. Specifically, I'm thinking about the risks that AI poses to organizations, not how organizations can use AI. That's a whole separate conversation.
Mm.
And there's definitely some advantages that AI, if we use it in the right way,
Mm.
that can result in improving and bolstering cybersecurity and compliance. But
Mm.
you have employees that are using corporate devices, they're using their own devices. There's a plethora, and it keeps growing in leaps and bounds of different AI tools that are available for them to use.
Mm.
And the reality is there's human error that happens. That was one aspect in the Verizon report that came out, which is not new. That's been the case forever, I think, since digital technology existed. That employees are loading stuff into these AI tools that they shouldn't be loading into. If it's a private AI tool that is hermetically sealed, that the corporation has developed, and we have that here at Kiteworks, then it's okay to load it into those tools because it's not going to be exposed publicly. But with these public Gen AI tools, you can load, PII data, PHI data, corporate secrets, Q&A, M&A activity that's taking place, financial documents, strategic plans. You can go down a whole long list of things that you don't want to have exposed in those tools. There's a great Stanford study that I published a blog post on. I think it's coming out today, actually. It's a 648-page report. It's hefty. But in it, they found that I think it's 8.5% of the content that's being loaded into the AI tools is private or confidential and shouldn't be loaded today by employees. So are you seeing that as a big risk with your clients? Are they thinking that far in advance? And what are they doing other than, initially when AI came out, it was, well, we're not going to use it.
Right.
We knew that was, ostrich head in the sand is not going to work. We predicted that from day one. Isn't going to work. What are you telling your clients and what are you seeing on that front?
It's funny. So I have students that do the same thing, right? We want them to use AI like a tool, not as a crutch. And so I imagine, like when I went to college, I'm 52. When I went to college, like we still use the Dewey Decimal System, and then then you could use this really new cool thing called the internet. And we were the grumpy old curmudgeons saying, well, back in my day, we had to look things up on the Dewey Decimal System. and so I think AI becomes that next evolution of the previous generation saying, well, back in my day. So I think there's a little bit of generational technology angst. How do you use it effectively like a tool as opposed to, well, let's just throw everything in there? And so like most organizations are either blocking it, saying you can't use it, or they have their own, like within M365, they've got their own Copilot, which is contained to their instance, and so they can use that within their organization, like that that becomes okay. And I don't know a way to get it because you have shadow IT, and so people can take stuff.
Yeah, shadow AI.
yeah, and they can put stuff in there. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer. Like it's when you put data into the model, right? The model gets smarter, and based on how you ask it questions and you respond to those prompts, like then you get better. You get better responses and better outcomes. So that data is actually benefiting everyone else except for if you're exposing PII, PHI. But how would you even get to that? Like I haven't asked AI yet or Chat GPT, hey, show me social security numbers from 500 people, or and I don't know that it would do that, right? So I'm sort of leaning on the hope that the developers will put some sort of mechanism in there to keep AI from responding to those prompts. But that's crossing my fingers at this point. I think by and large, organizations accept that people are going to use it. They have corporate policies that say to not to. And then they use some sort of internal mechanism. Like I said, if they're an M365 shop, they use Copilot. But I think I don't think that's the last word on that. Like I don't even think saying we're close to the last word on that, because I think there are security threats. There are attacks that can be leveraged, that can leverage AI. There are malware modifications that you can make through AI to evade detection. There's can you detect could I get around a WAF and run a DDoS attack with AI generated packets, right? I think there's a lot that we haven't figured out yet. So I would say watch this space. I think there's going to be a lot of activity here, and I think industry is looking to, the government, looking to academia, looking to working groups, like InfraGard, like Cyber Fraud Task Force, to say, hey, help us figure out what we do here, because I don't think anyone has a really good answer just yet, other than everybody be careful. We don't quite know what's going to happen with this. Because once the data is out there, it's out there, right? And there's no putting the...
Cyber criminals are figuring out how to write reverse prompts to retrieve data that organizations have inadvertently loaded into the AI.
It wouldn't surprise me.
That's quite possible. That was proven in the first year when AI was released. They had already figured that aspect out, unfortunately.
I think the whole AI and quantum computing things, I think right now we're monkeys throwing darts at dartboards. We can guess, but typically human beings are really bad at predicting the future. I just think we need to be cautious and understand that we're playing with things that, are probably going to, not give us the return that we want and make things a bit worse for us in the end. But I'd be really cautious at any predictions. I think it's chimpanzees and dartboards right now.
Yeah. We would argue that you need to have the right governance controls in place, and Kiteworks can help with that from the standpoint of you have private data, it's stored in Kiteworks, it's transferred, whether it's file share or MFT or email. If it's in Kiteworks, then it's controlled. You're not, you're only going to be able to share it with certain people, and who you share it with if they opened it. And then with possessionless editing, then the data doesn't leave your environment. So I think there's some technology capabilities that are out there, but getting the right policies in place as an organization also is critically important. And then, if your organization is using AI, you realize there's some applications for AI that need to be done in that hermetically sealed box. So you need to develop your own AI tool that you use within your organization. So for sure. A lot left to do, obviously, on that front. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. This has been a really interesting conversation. Chris, number one, how can organizations get in touch with CyberCX? What's the best way to do so?
Yeah, you can go to our website, cybercx.com. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, cybercx.com.au or cybercx.co.nz, NZ for New Zealand. You can also look us up on LinkedIn. You can call me. You can email me, chris.pogue@cybercx.com. We have a huge LinkedIn presence. You can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can reach out. We have 12 disciplines of cybersecurity, and this is all we do. So we'd love to have a conversation and provide you some additional information about the capabilities that we have and how we can help your organization.
That's great. Well, I encourage everyone we'll include a link, obviously, with the podcast on the webpage, and it'll go into the different podcast platforms at the same time. So make sure to check out CyberCX as well as Chris's LinkedIn profile. Well, Chris, we appreciate your time today. I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. Really appreciate it.
Well, and for audience, thanks for listening to another Kitecast episode. You can check out other Kitecast episodes at kiteworks.com/Kitecast.